Amy, good morning. Let's start off with your word of the day.
Good morning, Frank. My word of the day is disconnect. And I think, even up until last Friday, there had been this relatively large disconnect between the sentiment that I think we're all feeling, the kind of angst in the market, and what the market is actually doing. A little bit of that has shaken out, but I think that disconnect still exists.
Also, I want to get to your pick. I know you don't give us an exact stock pick, but you give us a play when it comes to the options market. This one's related to NVIDIA, which, by the way, ever since DeepSeek, those shares are down about 8%. So what is that play?
So the play is looking at hedging in NVIDIA, and you can look at March NVIDIA puts or put spreads. These are both structures that protect your downside. And the way we think about this is when you look back to positioning, and frankly, when you look back to the last few years, it's all about the chase and upside, the right tail in NVIDIA. And we have gotten to a point where the positioning is relatively full. You have a relatively large earnings print coming up. And we know that the stock has been quite reactive. So we like that hedge, and the options on the downside tail are taking advantage of that with that structure that I mentioned.
Speaking of hedging, when we're looking at investors looking for some downside protection in the market, a lot of volatility in recent days, what are you seeing when it comes to the price of that protection and just the sentiment in general when you look at the options market, at least when it comes to investors?
Yeah, it's been interesting, Frank, because we're definitely, if you just think about the year on year, up in terms of hedging, up in terms of volatility. But at the same time, on a historical basis, I wouldn't say it's that high. When you think back, even using 5-year percentiles, we're still below average levels, and I think that just speaks to, again, that disconnect that there is in the market. And right now, I'd say a lot of investors just are on the sidelines. They see all this news flow, all these headlines. They're not sure what's going to come next. And of course, with the Trump administration, there can be a lot of waffling or changes last minute. And the way people have positioned for that right now isn't necessarily to hedge more. It's actually just not to deploy more.
Amy, we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you, when you look at the first Trump administration compared to this one, how do you see investors reacting when it comes to downside protection and their view on some of the volatility?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say investors are really taking much more seriously what he says in terms of tariff implementation. I think there was this thought 6 months ago that Trump would manage the stock market, that the stock market was a gauge of his success. I'm not saying that's not true, but I'm also saying that they're taking much more seriously the downside tails.